Hey, good morning. What's shaking, Warfighter Nation? Ron here with Warfighter Ranch and Isaiah 6.8. And today we're bringing you a Faith in a Foxhole, another session of Bridging the Gap called Picking Your Battles. I don't know about you guys, but people ask me all the time why I think the world is in its current state. You can see the tangible passion on their face. You can hear their servant's heart. And it's all wrapped up in this mind-boggling haze as they try to reconcile the evils of the world, but can't. Sometimes I can almost smell the smoke grinding from my own gears if I start to get too deep down certain rabbit holes. Spoiler alert, I've read the book to the end, and it really doesn't get much better between now and then. So let's embrace the suck and move forward in ways that we can deal with our lives until then. They say love covers all manner of sins. And that's true to a degree. But in loving our neighbor, there's many ways that we can do that. And here's just a couple as far as communication goes. There are a lot of civilians and those otherwise classified as non-combatants out there. At the last census, America's population was just north of 327 million. As a part of the 1%, as we go through our daily lives, somewhere out there in the warfighter space, it's sometimes difficult to grasp the enormity that is America from where we stand. It's become quite a common practice for me to talk to many more civilians than I used to. Now I can talk to anybody. But it wasn't always as easy for me as it is now. And even though it seems as though there's an ocean between our communities, one of our goals here at Warfighter Ranch is to help bridge the gap. Now, we open the conversation in a number of different ways. For example, when Helen and I wrote Ghost Nation about living with PTS, TBI, and all the other tidbits of awesome sauce contained therein, told by both the veteran and the spouse, we wanted to offer a truthful, unbiased, and very realistic picture for those who may be encountering it for the first time. It really doesn't paint a very flattering picture of living with someone with a combat veteran, but then again, it's not supposed to. It's supposed to be an honest, transparent view into our lives. It's an example of love in the finest form. We had no idea of the response that it would get, and to date, we have sent out over 5,000 e-copies free all over the globe. It's in this regard that brings me to this message. One of the primary things that separates our groups is a huge communication gap. We both speak English, however, we also speak two completely different languages. The cultures also tend to clash for one major reason. One group is on the receiving end of the freedom, while the other has lived and died to defend it. I'm not pointing this out as a sense of elitism, but to point out that perspective can be vastly different. Perspective is everything. We don't exactly speak fluent civilian with all the amenities, privileges, and assumptions of freedom that it seems to come with. We don't assimilate well as servant leaders in our community, consumed by consumption. Some sound confident and some sound cocky. But we've already backed it up by risking everything for it. It's difficult not to compare in this situation, but take it from the source. In the America I grew up in, my daddy always said, don't let your alligator mouth overload your candy ass. For me personally, when I hear speaking someone like that, I wonder how deep that confidence goes. Did they even know what it took to produce and maintain a country that allows them to speak so freely and reckless? I do. And it's through that same lens that a lot of warfighters see this as well. This can be sometimes seen as shallow or a sense of false bravado and not patriotism. not through the eyes of the warfighter, though. Over time, we can become jaded towards such things. We size up and validate people in our minds in about the first 30 seconds after meeting them. It's in our nature. What I did before I found my salvation, well, I was pretty quick on the trigger to call something out if it triggered my BS meter. Now, I can work a trigger. That's always been a strong suit of mine. But I find now in this paradigm shift of our battle initiative that aggressive combat leadership is not needed as much as pragmatic, open-minded, purposeful living. Every one of us, every day, represents the warfighter nation. Now more than ever, knowing when to keep my finger off the proverbial trigger requires more discipline and intestinal fortitude, leaning forward in faith and brushing feelings aside, thereby taking the higher road. I never said it was easy. Like anything else, it takes training and lots of practice. This, like any other training goal, does lead to the greater good. Growing pains. Waging war is never easy. Neither is waging peace. Nowadays, I'm not so hot-headed as I used to be. I'm not the stolen valor police. I'm not the sole judge, jury, and executioner over any social issues. Do I have my moments? Yes. Do other issues and things like stolen valor still bother me? Sure, but not nearly as much as they used to, and there are two very good reasons why. Reason number one, at the end of the day, that's between them and God. And number two, it's not really any of my business. Look, I'm a Somalia veteran. What that means to me personally in the context of stolen valor is that it is one of the top conflicts that these guys, even other veterans, try to claim as their own for whatever reason. I think they see it as some sense of notoriety. As MOG vets, we do not. Yes, there's a federal law, the Stolen Valor Act, and if people get caught, then so be it. If veterans help them getting caught, then so be it. But I needed to let that go and lighten my own ruck because it was eating me up pretty hard. But if I can let it go, anybody can. When I carried that weight around all the time, walking around like a Stolen Valor sniper, I was miserable. And I can't tell you the amount of times young veterans have even called me out for stolen valor after the slightest mention of Mogadishu. But if I can let it go, anybody can. When I carried that weight around all the time, walking around like a stolen valor sniper, I was miserable. And I can't tell you the amount of times young veterans have even called me out for stolen valor after the slightest mention of Mogadishu. And it would almost be funny if it weren't true. But most of these youngins that have pulled that on me were so young that to them, it wasn't even anything more than a video game. This is kind of getting a little out of control. That being said, there are a couple of common scenarios that I encounter pretty regularly, both on opposite ends of our left and right limits. The first is pretty simple. It's the scenario where somebody either suddenly walks up on you or is introduced to you and says, "Thank you for your service." For years, this was an awkward occurrence to me, and it always left me feeling uneasy. Over the years, I've learned to somewhat auto-reply with, "And thank you for your support," paired with a handshake. It's a muscle memory reaction at this point, but it's sincere and reciprocal. It's direct action. It's clean, effective, and respectful. I realize that it also does somewhat deflect back on the person making the original compliment, and I'm still kind of rubbing my noggin over that one. But in all honesty, I really believe that it really helps to bridge the gap by way of letting them know how much their genuine support means, and that it is undeniably appreciated. This is important. This next one, maybe not so much. A funny thing happens when you meet a civilian and they discover that you're a combat vet. And somewhere in their head, a little light comes on. And that burning question that they've always desired an answer to comes flying out of their mouth with less tact than our commander-in-chief on social media. What are your thoughts on the state of affairs in blah, blah, blah country? What are your thoughts on ISIS, the Taliban, Iraq, or Afghanistan? Should we even be over there? Or the infamous and quite unoriginal, have you ever, killed anyone? It comes out in whispered and hushed tones, of course. And as I stand there, eyebrow raised, attentive and leaning in, waiting for the inevitable question to come, quite often they beat around the bush a while. And the whole time I'm thinking, please land this thing. And when they do ultimately land on one wheel on the icy pond like a half shot up duck, I can only assume that if my thoughts were smoke, they would be pouring out of my ears by now. Usually, I laugh a bit nervously, I admit. Apparently this confuses them to some degree. And then I put them out of their misery or throw them a bone with options. How deep do you want to go down the rabbit hole? Which usually brings a follow-up question. What do you mean, they say? Now this is where it gets real. I tell them, number one, that's a very personal thing. Number two, it's not a simple yes or no question. If I tell you my answer, it will undoubtedly prompt other questions and go deeper down this path. I know the whole story and I carry that with me every day. The question is, are you willing by proxy to do the same? The truth is, most people are not truly prepared to hear the depth and breadth of our experiences. They've seen Black Hawk Down or Platoon one or too many times and somehow morph their own imagination into believing that they perhaps know more than they actually do. Modern Hollywood. I'm not a gambling man, but I'd bet that those willing to delve deeper down that road with you most likely has love for you at some level past the surface. It's more than just one question. It's very deep. But love goes deep, and so does God. Those not willing to go further were only ever full of morbid curiosity at best. I know this sounds like a pretty black and white response, but it's usually pretty accurate. So there you have it for now. And just remember, communication will solve or create 90% of your problems. God bless you. We love you. Warfighter responsibly. Next mission time now.